I thought what I talk about is what I always talk about. What I talk about in the classroom, what I talk about on any street corner I can speak. And that's about homelessness, but from a different perspective. You see, to me, homelessness isn't simply about housing. It never has been. And so what I want to do with you today is to talk about it from the perspective of poverty. And it's about the most severe poverty of our time. So what I want to do today is share with you, first, a few headlines that I think kind of put things in perspective, and then take you on a tour of poverty in the United States and how we got here. I'll talk about homelessness from a perspective I don't think you've heard. I'll tell you what homelessness is about and how the homelessness we know today is homegrown for specific reasons other than simply housing. And then I will give you a glimpse into the future. I will tell you what I think is going to happen with homelessness and what I think some of the answers to homelessness are. So I just want to share these headlines with you that I'm notorious for writing down and losing. And this probably happened. Well, here we go. Okay. The two professional political parties both straddle the key questions of our time. But the new class party is silent about nothing. These are headlines. The parties lie to us, the political speakers mislead us. U.S. senators have come to represent something more than a state or a region. They represent principalities and powers of business. Immigration continues unchecked. They form a standing army of labor. Everywhere properties are in foreclosure, and the government does little. Factories are shutting down entirely. 642 banks have closed their doors. A fourth of our heavy industries are in decline or dying. Wall Street owns the country. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. Now that really sounds like our world today, right? All of those headlines are from 1890s. So that's where we're going to begin. I'm going to take you 120 years back, and I'm going to show you that what we experience today is no different than what we experienced in this country over time. And the 1890s are a good period to start, because it was a period very much like today. There was a Great Depression, second only to the 1930s, most people don't know. In 1893, it was also a period where immigration was the problem, not from South America, Mexico, but from Southern and Eastern Europe. It was also a period of third-party movements, some of the strongest we've had, the People's Party and eventually the Populist Party. It sounds very much like today. It was a time when government didn't answer the needs of the people, very much like today. And all of these questions come together in this period. It was also a period of imperialism, when the United States decided that we should spread out, and with the Spanish-American War, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Hawaii become pieces of the U.S. province. And the same arguments made today that perhaps Iraq was a step of a new kind of imperialism during this period. So what is so unique about yesterday is that it represents today, and historians will tell you that if you don't learn from the past, you are destined to repeat. And that's kind of where we are. So let me begin in 1900, and let me tell you about poverty, and paint the picture of where we are today because of what we've done yesterday. I will tell you about lessons learned and lessons forgotten. And in the end, we'll be able to put homelessness into a true perspective. What was interesting today, although I came a little late, creative arts team really picked up on some of the issues that I think are so important to making a point about this poverty. So I'll begin. So around 1900, this country was in transition, moving from an agrarian to an industrial nation. So what does that mean? The way of life is changing. The standard of living for people are in transition. There will be winners and there will be losers. And poverty at the turn of this century was about 50% in America, but it was a different poverty. In that time, you could live off the land. People lived on farms. When I spoke about foreclosures in the 1890s, they were not home foreclosures, they were farm foreclosures happening all across the country. So we moved from that period, and if you think about it today, it's the same thing. We have moved from an industrial state to a technological state. And we have done the same thing we did 100 years ago, displaced millions of people and families, changed their standard of living, and redefined what the world is going to look like for them for the next years and generations to come. So in 1900, the country has about 50% poverty, and the same problems we have today, we had then. Now, what most people don't know is that government plays no role in America. The early history of America, government is simply about the military, about building roads, about safety issues. And so people who are poor, people who are in poverty, it is the religious organizations that play a role. And so we move through the first decade of the 20th century, and that is where we get a period of progressivism, social progressivism. That's where you get groups like the Children's Aid Society, Community Service Society, all of these public organizations usually started by wealthy blue-blood families that are going to help the poor. And the issue is too big now for simply the religious organizations to handle. So for the first time in 1932 and 33, you get an American president elected, Franklin Roosevelt, who has a new idea. And what I'm going to talk about all today is about new ideas around the issue of homelessness. And Roosevelt says, you know, I think I can do something about this poverty in this country. In fact, he says, I know I can. I will take government and put government's hand in dealing with poverty in America. And he does. And you get the New Deal, a new deal for everyone. What's significant for us and what we're interested in is not all employment programs. Those are all terrific. Put people to work. Do what you have to do. Government play a role. What we're interested in is that for the first time, an American president takes a pen and takes action. And what we get that's related to homelessness in the long run and poverty are two things. We get the Social Security Act. And Roosevelt's idea there was to eliminate poverty for the elderly. And that's what Social Security would do. But within the Social Security Act is aid for dependent children that we were all familiar with until the 90s. And that was a part that said, I will also be sure that young mothers with children don't become poor in America, and we will provide a standard of living. So for the first time, government action begins to reduce poverty significantly. You go through the New Deal, and we come up to 1960s. Now, the way history works, and the way politics works, it works in generational cycles. It's important to know, because it dictates part of the future that's going to happen. The first cycle is 1900 to 1932, 33, 30-something years. That's our first cycle of generation. Now we're in 1932, we're coming up to the 60s. 1960, a young professor at City University wrote a book, Michael Harrington, called The Other America. It's still used in urban government classes all over the great universities. And in that book he said, you know, all the good, and it was a good period in America after the war. The 50s, everyone had a home, there was full employment tax, the GI Bill, everyone was going to school, it was a great period. But by 1960, poverty in the United States had only declined to about 19% again. We were back to where we were before the Great Depression. And Harrington writes, as good as things are here, it's still not good enough for certain people living there. And he was speaking about Appalachia, and he was speaking about urban America. So Johnson comes in, and Johnson, you know, began as a school teacher in a single-room schoolhouse in Texas. That's what he was. Now, Johnson had been majority leader of the Senate. When he becomes, which is a very powerful position, and he was a very powerful leader, when he becomes president, he sees an opportunity. And in his first State of the Union message, he gets up and he talks about the poverty he's seeing. And he talks about teaching in the schoolhouse. And he talks about all those young kids. And he says, you know, I never thought in those days that I would have the opportunity to change the way of life for those kids. And in front of Congress, he makes this dynamic speech. He says, but today I have that power, and I'll let you in on a secret, I'm going to use it. And he makes the statement that you don't know what poverty can do until you see the scars it can leave on the face of a child who once had a dream. Now, Johnson understood this issue, and he understood the opportunity and the moment. So for the second time in history, and this is important because we don't see things like this today, a president takes a pen and says, I am going to change the standard of living for the middle class, for underclass, for poor people and poor children in this country. And he does. We get now the Great Society. Now the Great Society gets a lot of different raps. People like to pick on it and say a lot of things, but the Great Society did a lot of great things that were successful. We get Head Start, major success. Some people still argue it's not. It's wrong. It is. It jumpstarts kids on education. We get food stamps. Oh, it's a terrible thing to do. What? To feed hungry older people? Hungry poor people and kids? You have Newt Gingrich today calling the president the biggest food stamp whatever in the world. Well, congratulations. I'm glad we're feeding more people in need than ever before. Kind of makes sense. You get Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid for poor kids to have health care coverage, and Medicare for the elderly, so that we can continue what Roosevelt did and reduce poverty for senior citizens in this country. You also get the Secondary Elementary School Act, which opens the doors of equal education to everybody. And government's now going to spend money on education to be sure it's an equal opportunity for everybody. Super important. You get employment programs, you get model cities, you get all kinds of things. Some that worked and some that didn't. But what you did get was government playing a role, again, in making the standard of living for Americans better. Something that hadn't happened in this country all the way up to 1932. So we leave the period of 65, and the results start to come in. Now again, it's a 30-year cycle, 1932 to 1965. We're seeing the cycle of history, the political change that comes, and the generation swings. So in 65, poverty starts to decline. And there are problems with some of the programs. I mean, welfare, although it was really beefed up, really made people a lot more dependent, things that would set the stage for what would happen in the 90s. But there was so much success that it's important to note. So that by 1980, now 1980 is going to be a watershed year in America. By 1980, poverty in this country is at 10%, the lowest in the history of America. 10% poverty. Something's working. But other things have been at work also. And here's where we're going to get introduced to homelessness and its roots. By 1980, America had undergone a transition that the Great Society put in place. And what was that transition? See, everyone thinks the Great Society was about civil rights. Well, that's an indirect aspect of it. The Great Society was about equal opportunity to participate in the American dream and guaranteeing your right for that. What did that mean? Well, Johnson and his program said there are three key things to the American dream. Number one, good job. Number two, good education, school for your kids. And number three, a good, decent home. Now you start the foundation of where homelessness is going to come from. You now take working Americans, blue collar, white collar, and you're telling them, you're going to move back in line. And they say, I supported this, but I did not support this methodology. But the government goes forward, and you know, quotas became such a big deal. If you were living during this period, people arguing, fighting, and it just alienated the population. You move to the second issue of education. Now that's all to the end of the 60s. In the 70s, we start, now we're going to equal education. Everybody's for it. Why not? Everybody should have a great education in America so they can make a great living and live in a great place. The problem here becomes methodology again. Whatever government's doing, whoever's in charge isn't thinking it through. How are we going to equal education? We're going to bus children. You're going to do what? We're going to take kids from poor neighborhoods and bus them to middle-class neighborhoods, and we're going to take kids from middle-class neighborhoods and bus them to poor neighborhoods, and watch, all the education will rise. Well, what's the number one thing everyone's parents are concerned with? A good school for your kid. That's why you move to a community. You know, whether you agree with these things or not, this is reality. You move there for a good school, a good home, and a good job. So now you take another chunk of America who supported this kind of change of equal access, and now says, I didn't buy into this. I supported equal education. I didn't support busing my kid around. And the story is easy. You all know it. In Boston, you know, it breaks out and becomes a national war over public versus about all this multiculturalism. Part of it is because our public education system is broken. You know, Thomas Jefferson passed in 1787 the Northwest Ordinance and said, what it said was any community, any city, town that was incorporated in America must set aside a piece of land for a public school. He understood. People understood. You know, our public education system is only 120 years old as we know it. It's from the turn of the century, from the 1890s, when Dewey was involved in writing about this, and we started to put real money into public schools. And today we've gone complete spiraling out of control. And Jefferson also makes a statement at this period that is so true today. He says, a nation that wants to be both free and ignorant and call itself civilized wants what never has been and wants what never can be. And that is the most truthful statement. And that applies here. So we start to create problems in public education in the 70s. So what did you do? You alienated voters about jobs, you alienated voters about the educational institutions of their kids, and you alienated them about their neighborhoods. And that's where, in 1980, the political campaign really comes home. And Ronald Reagan, a really, really bright politician, brilliant, understands this. And Reagan says, you know what? I'm going to run on a campaign for all you people, all you suburban people, you people in good middle-class urban neighborhoods. I'm going to fight about your employment, I'm going to fight about your schools, and I'm going to fight about your housing. And he terms it, I am going to get government off your back. And that slogan is still used today. I want government off my back. And it really comes out of this period. And this really sets the stage for homelessness, because homelessness isn't about housing. Homelessness is about poverty. And that's what Reagan puts in motion. And he's smart. He gets the votes of all the blue-collar Democrats, all the suburban people, and you know, he ends up with a landslide 4 years in. But Reagan's job wasn't done. Once they won the election, they sat back and said, look, this is good. We're in for the first time in a long time, but we need to be sure that we're going to be back. We need to institutionalize this. So what does government off your back mean? It becomes a code word for poverty and what we're going to do with poverty. And the policymakers in the Reagan administration said, well, the only way to guarantee this is to reduce benefits, is to reduce the availability of funding for people to move around, to change their way of life, to change what's going on. Now, you know, the 1980s is a great period, the early 80s of inflation, the late 70s, early, great inflation. I mean, things were running 17, 18, 19, 20% interest rates through 20%. It's really a crazy period. So Reagan says, if we reduce public assistance, hold it steady. We won't reduce it, but we won't increase it. No cost of living increases, it stays steady. Let's reduce some money for daycare, Head Start. Let's do away with these job programs. Did away with the CETA program, which was the Comprehensive Training Employment Act, which Richard Nixon instituted and was one of the biggest contributors to the reduction in poverty, putting people to work, working for government through block grants, giving people jobs. It taught that you could be somebody, you could be part of the system. It worked terrifically. Reagan wipes it out. So you always had this steady cycle in the city of New York, about 7, 8 million people, with only 700 or 800 families. And that's really nothing in the scope of government perspective. But all of a sudden, 1981 and 82, by the time the Reagan programs are now in place, you started to see a new poverty. And that's what we called it back then, this new poverty. Something started to grow, and started to grow with homeless families. You know, families that were homeless prior to the 80s, in the early 80s, usually a middle-aged woman with adolescent kids. She had a job, you know, she finished school, she had a work history. And the problem came up, and that was it, and it was very easy to fix. You start to see in the early 80s a change. You start to see families very young. Families now in their 20s, a young mother with 1 or 2 kids, not necessarily married, many hadn't finished school. A good number had aged out of foster care and suddenly ended up with a kid on their own. You start to see no employment. You see victims of domestic violence. About half of these young mothers were victims of domestic violence. You see a dramatic change. Now, at that time in New York City, which is the capital of homelessness in America, regardless of what anyone says, on every night the city houses approximately 40,000 people, men, women, and children. That's a city within a city. That's a major cost, and that's a major statement. In New York City, all of a sudden we start to see these numbers go up, up, up. And at that time, the mayor was Ed Koch. And Koch used to bring us in and say, look, because these stories are getting in the paper, make it go away. That was his famous line, every day. The mayor wants to talk to you guys, yeah, make it go away. Okay, you know, we're going to do it. And we did. We thought that was good. We said, don't worry about it, it's a cycle. We know how to do this. Well, it never went away. It just went up. And the day came when we had to go back and say, look, this is a different story. This isn't going away, and we're going to have to build something around it because it's getting out of control. And that's where homelessness really starts. Now, homelessness, right at this point there, is not about housing. It is about poverty that was pushed down. Now, the important point about poverty and government intervention, when government comes in, as Roosevelt did, when government comes in, as Johnson did, and when government steps back, as Reagan did, you're dealing with public policy, in a sense. Out of the Great Depression came all kinds of regulatory policies about industry, about finance, everything to ensure that we wouldn't have those problems again. Out of the Great Society came another set of regulations to guarantee that people would have equal access and everything else. And what happens here with poverty, we're regulating poverty, government coming in, it's just like when you regulate the airlines, when you regulate the trucking industry. By 1980, we're starting to deregulate poverty. Now, by regulating it, we're reducing it. When we start to deregulate it, we're increasing it. And that's when you see that 10 to 14% jump all of a sudden in the end of the Reagan years. So we come up and we start to see this homelessness in government, and we start to say, you know what? We have to build shelters. The hotels can't do it anymore. We've turned every hotel in New York into a welfare hotel. They are hell. And we need to start to do something different. An immediate approach in New York City is, quick, open up these concrete shelters, and we use gymnasium floors. We put women and children together on cots pushed together, and you know, plastic shower curtains around and say, here, this is your spot for tonight. We would do it on gym floors, before custodians would come. I mean, I can't tell you the number of families that we used to do that. So I used to be on that phone all day long, get me another school, get me another school. And they have to be up by 6 o'clock because the custodians throw them out and give them juice and some cookies, and we'll see you again. New York really dealt with it as a crisis, but that was the beginning of the learning curve on what to do about the kind of homelessness we see today, and in particular, family homelessness. And we called that Tier 1. The first stage, congregate shelters, and we opened them all over the city, and we still use welfare hotels because we had to. And we had a crisis. Homelessness through the 80s is a crisis. In New York, the numbers finally hit by the mid-80s, end of the 80s, 5,000 families. Unheard of. We are now 500% above what we ever dealt with prior to this situation. And it is the deregulation of poverty that's driving it. You come to the 90s, and homelessness is all over the country now. It's taking place everywhere, and it's being dealt with in a million different ways across America. And you come to a period when people are still arguing and saying, we want government off our back, we want government out of our lives, and politicians running saying, yeah, we're going to shrink government, we're going to take it down, and we're going to do this, this, this. You come to 1996. 1996, again, the cycle. 32, 65, 96, another 30 years. And government's going to take another major step. And this time, Clinton says, I am going to get involved in this, and he picks up a pen and says, I am going to change dependency on public assistance. And it's a deregulatory step. And things had to be done about AFDC. I don't know if what we did was good. We're living it. And we deregulate it. We do away with aid for dependent children, and we get TANF. We all know what that is. It takes its place, and there's a time limit on it. In 5 years, you're on your own. A miracle's going to happen, and things are going to be great. Right? We deregulate poverty, and now homelessness takes a quantum leap. So it goes like it's never gone before. The late 90s, and then into the 2000s, government's coming out of the picture more and more. And the more it does, the more poverty, not just homelessness, because homelessness is the rawest of poverty. Poverty going up in America. We stand here today with the latest census figures that tell us today poverty is 15.3%. That 22% of our kids are living in poverty, up from 18% in 2007. We're seeing it grow in quantum leaps here, especially child poverty. We are told today that 1 of every 2 people, 45% of the United States, is either poor or near poor. Something's radically wrong. And the debate continues whether or not government should play a role. And all the debates that we're seeing now are how government should play no role in anything. We are rolling back into the 19th century. We're going back before 1900. And the issues of poverty are getting worse and worse. So homelessness now explodes. And I'll use New York as the example simply because I know it the best. In New York, there's no idea what to do. It's getting crazy, and we start to build, as we move down the end of the 80s into the 90s, a new tier of shelter in New York. And we call it a Tier 2. And we realize these congregate shelters are inhumane, all kinds of problems. And a Tier 2 shelter would be what we call across the country transitional housing. It would be temporary housing where people would have their own apartment, they'd have their own cooking facility, it wouldn't be congregate, you'd have a chance to really get your life back together, figure out what's going on. Now homelessness is made up of a lot of things, and this is the problem. When we talk about homelessness, we talk about families who are simply caught in something temporarily, and they should be moved back as soon as you can into permanent housing. We talk about, and this is what the public assistance roles were. On the top, it was easy. People on public assistance for something, out very fast. In the middle, you have people on public assistance, you have homeless families that come into the system. They simply need some supports, whether it be transportation, childcare, or help finding a job, out as soon as you can. And the same thing on public assistance when we changed the law in '96. But on the bottom third, on public assistance and in homelessness, we have a very chronic poverty. We have people who do have problems. Some people don't like to admit it, but we see families all the time who are victims of domestic violence. 47% of our young mothers, and you know what domestic violence is. You return to the abuser 4, 5, 6 times. By the time that happens, you lose a child to foster care, which costs us $40,000 a year. You lose 2 kids to foster care. You start to feed all the different systems. Mental health, you can't take it anymore. Now, you're a chronic mental health person in intermediate acute care. Here we go. Other people are lost into the juvenile justice system, into the criminal justice system. We have really driven this issue all over the place. It's no longer simply about housing, it's about everything. It's about every social ill that this country has. And we're responsible for growing it over and over again. There is a great recidivism rate in this country that people don't like to talk about. In New York City, right now, the latest statistic I was given was that 49% of the families in the shelter system have been here before. Most recently, it's been a 41% curve, so we even had an increase here. Coalition Homeless uses that figure. You're seeing this problem, which means we're doing something wrong. And the answer then comes, what do we do with homelessness? What is the next step? Where do we go? Now, all around the country, some places I visit are still at the congregate stage. You have to evolve. Some cities are in denial. No, it's going to go away. It's not going to go away. We are going to have, we do have what we had in the 30s, families that move from one city to another city, one part of the country to another part of the country, looking for some place to live. Today we have in this country a major movement of housing first. And housing first is good. For families that should go out first. For families who are in here for all the wrong reasons. For working poor who now find themselves in our shelters. When we go to shelters today, you will find a working poor population. We find almost 20% of the young people in shelters in New York City work. They go to school. Kids go to school from shelters. People go to work from shelters. So a shelter's not a shelter. That's where you begin. This word's got to change. The question is, and I wrote about this, is that a shelter's not a home or is it? That was the book. And it raised the question. And the answer is, a shelter is a home. Because nobody's building low-income housing in this country, and nobody will build it to the extent of need. There are 13.2 million low-income renters in America. There are only 8.2 or 3 million low-income units in America. That's a 40% deficit, 5-point-something million units that are missing. And you will not have government participate on any significant level when the middle class is being notched down. You are living the period of the notched-down generation in the United States. Not for poor people, they're there, but for middle-class people. You know, we have all of these kids failing in reading and math because we don't have the after-school programs that we should have in shelters and around shelters. We don't have the daycare we should have in shelters. This brings me back to the whole point of what is the answer to this. The answer is the shelter. The answer, where you begin to reduce homelessness in the United States, is at the shelter door. I hate to say it, but I'm telling you. This is low-income housing. Call it what you want, don't believe it, it is. We have taken away poor communities, we have gentrified them. They're gone. Where people used to be able to make it, they're gone. And what do you do when you gentrify? Everybody's happy. Look, we made a great community. Well, what does everybody have to see it? Well, they're not in such great communities. We gave people vouchers, housing vouchers. And we said, hey, take this voucher, you can live anywhere in America. Well, you can't. You're going to live in a poor section of America with some slumlord most of the time that will take that voucher because it's guaranteed, and he or she won't fix anything. And what do we do about homelessness? And everyone said, well, people have to go to work. Well, that's terrific. You know? Even if you gave everyone a minimum wage paycheck, they're not going anywhere. You can't afford the housing. And that's the answer. It is a shelter, and it shouldn't be called a shelter. It's called a community resource center. We should be calling these things anything but a shelter. These aren't temporary. To me, this is all about a battle. Okay? And public policy is a battle. Public policy is incremental. The problem is sometimes it increments up, many times it increments down. And there needs to be a rethinking about what government's role is with this. If we don't think with some new ideas here, if we don't pay attention at what we've done in New York, because I know it, where we've been on this issue today, and if we don't look back before we go forward, then we're going to add many, many more names that are less illustrious monuments of poverty than I spoke of before. We have the opportunity to begin the world again. Yeah, but we're going to issue a report that we're going to do in February that is called, and it may be online, Donna will know later, she'll tell you, A New Path, an immediate plan to reduce family homelessness. And it talks about emerging trends in New York.